Today, this session is sponsored by the Embassy of Spain, and I'm very privileged to introduce Ambassador Santiago Cabañas to make some notes. Thank you.
Good evening, buenas tardes, muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Beatriz. It's really an honor for me to be here today. Mrs. María Dueñas, really it's an honor to have you here in Washington, D.C. We're so pleased to have you in Washington at this great event, the National Book Festival. And Suzanne, thank you very much for being with us today. We're really thrilled to have you both on stage tonight. I really wanted to say that it's a privilege for us to have María Dueñas here. You know her. She's well beloved in my country, in Spain, but all over the world, because her work is really extraordinary. Her books, really, you cannot put them down. Her characters are so vivid. Her narrative is so strong, and her background, historical background, is so well researched that it's really a pleasure to read her books. So we're privileged to have you here. I wanted to thank the Library of Congress for organizing this event and for permitting so many Spanish-speaking authors to be present at this festival. We share a common language. We share a treasure, the Spanish language. And I really mean it when I say we share it, because it's not only the language of Cervantes and Lope de Vega, it's the language of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, the language of Rubén Darío, the language of Gabriel García Márquez. It's the language of everyone, and it's really a treasure. I would like also to acknowledge the presence of other Spanish personalities here at this festival. This morning we had here another great Spaniard, well beloved like María Dueñas in Spain and here in the United States, José Andrés, the great chef, who was presenting one of his books, and he was talking also about his experiences in life. I know that Suzanne Chattel, the head of the cherished Hispanic Division of the Library of Congress, I would like to thank you first for the great work you do preserving the Hispanic culture in the United States, and for the great partnership that you've had with the Spanish Embassy all over the years, and also for being here today with María Dueñas. Thank you indeed. But I wanted to thank you, the Library of Congress, really, for the great work they do here in the United States. And I wanted also to, I know that you're going to introduce María, but I just would like to say a couple of things. First, that it's important for us Spaniards that live in the United States that your book deal with our common past, our common history of the United States and Spain. Two of your 4 books, well-beloved books, deal with these myriad relationships and bonds that have been tied over the centuries between Spaniards and citizens of the United States. It's a history that goes well back, as Mrs. Chattel will probably explain to you, and we're very proud of that history. And second, María, that we want you back. We hope to have you back, and now I know that people want to listen to you both. So again, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you to you, Suzanne, and thank you all here for being here today. Muchas gracias. And thank you to María Molina, our cultural counselor, for the great work she does. Muchas gracias, María. Muchas gracias.
More thank yous. It really takes a community to celebrate books and to write books and to research books and to read books. So I want to thank everyone in the audience for being here this evening and for reading and for writing and for sharing work in those ways. Thank you, María.
Thank you very much.
I'd also like to thank our interpreter. We have an interpreter on the stage, and I hope you all join me in thanking our interpreter. Of course, we're also here to celebrate books that were originally written in Spanish and then translated into English. And there is one that is the focus of our event this evening. But as the ambassador noted, María Dueñas has published 4 books, and all 4 of those have been translated. Maybe not the last.
Not the last.
Not
yet.
the last.
It's been published in the US, but in Spanish.
Okay.
So far.
Okay, so we have, and we have multiple translations in multiple languages. I think I saw over, pretty close to 40 different languages. So those of you who know Maria's work, like the ambassador, will love the storytelling that's happening. So I just want to talk real quickly for those who don't know of the books that are published. A little bit about those, and then I'll open it up for some discussion of process, and we can talk about Templanza Vineyard, or we can talk about some of the other books. But I want to make sure that I leave enough time for the audience to ask questions at the end. Okay? So let me talk just real quickly, introduce Maria and some of the books. So we have oh, and I guess I have to do the job that I have as a librarian, and that is invite you all to the Hispanic Division. If you haven't been, please come. You can certainly get a copy, and Maria can confirm this, of each one of her books, at least in Spanish, in the reading room at the Library of Congress, and everyone is welcome. So her first book, El tiempo entre costuras, translated as A Time in Between, or The Seamstress. Some people might know that title a little bit better. Misión Olvida, which is heartfelt to me because I moved here from New Mexico, and she's talking about the misiones in the western United States. And the English version, the English language translation is The Heart Has Its Reasons. And today we're focusing on La Templanza, originally written in 2015, so Maria is going back to think about that book and to talk about it. It's translated as Vineyard in the United States and as A Vineyard in Andalusia in England. And then her latest book, Las Hijas del Capitán, published in the United States in Spanish, is out or coming out very soon?
No, it's out.
It's out, okay. Some of you may be familiar with a mini-series called The Seamstress, okay? And you should be on the lookout for an Amazon video for The Vineyard, which we're going to talk about today.
For next year.
Is it coming out next year? Because that
Next
also
year.
says 2019.
Next year.
Okay, on Amazon. So we're here today to talk about the Vineyard, but I thought that it would be interesting if we could use the Vineyard as a point of departure in order to talk about some of your other works. So I want to start by asking you a question about yourself as an author, and then we'll get into the books.
Okay.
So, and this is by way of introduction as well. Maria has a background in philology, and she was a university professor before she started writing fiction. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how you made the transition from academia to writing.
To writing.
What took you to writing, and how did that work for you?
Well, life sometimes offers you surprises whenever you don't expect them, like being here today, for example. So thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this invitation to become part of this huge festival, and thank you to the Embassy of Spain, Maria Ambassador, thank you for your wonderful words, and thank you, Suzanne, for being here today. So this is almost a surprise, because when I started writing, and this links to your question, Suzanne, when I started writing, I didn't have any idea at all of what was going to happen. I was teaching at the time. I was working as a full-time professor at the university, and in a field that has almost nothing to do with literature, because my area was, my field was applied linguistics. So there was a time in my life after almost 20 years teaching and researching, and I decided that I wanted to do something different, but I thought it was going to be something like on top of all my duties and all my daily activities. I never thought that in a year's time or a couple of years' time, I would leave the university and start a new career full-time writing. But it happened. I started writing during weekends, nights, not paying attention to my family. Suddenly they say, what are we going to have for dinner today? Sandwiches, because I was writing, I was so excited, but I never thought anything after publication. My goal, my main destination for my work was to get a publisher and to see my book published. That was all. I never thought what's going to happen later. And that was a surprise. Suddenly, the book, it was a time in between my first book, El tiempo entre costuras. So suddenly, it was just 3,500 books published. It was right before we started this terrible crisis we had in Spain. So things were, and nobody knew me. I was a completely unknown author. So I said, well, let's try with this little number of books, this little amount, and let's see what happens. And what happened was that by means of this phenomenon of, how do you say, word of mouth? Mm-hmm. Boca a oreja, boca a oreja. Boca a oreja, en español decimos boca a oreja, boca a boca. I used to say boca a boca. And there is a Spanish writer, Fernando Sánchez Dragó, and he told me, no, boca a boca is what you do when someone needs. That's boca a boca. What you need to persuade something to read something you have read and you have enjoyed is boca oreja, so word of mouth, whatever. Sorry. Sorry for this explanation. So then this started, the boca oreja, word of mouth process. And we were gaining readers and readers and readers, and suddenly the book started to, it was like a ball of snow that keeps growing and growing and growing, and you don't know what's going to happen. And from those 3,500 books, the next step was like 5,000 more, and 20,000 and 50,000. And there was a time in which I said, what's going on here? And after a year, well, after less than a year, after this was in June, after the summer, I started with my classes and my activities again. And like in April, May, I say, I cannot follow with these two activities at the same time. I couldn't manage to balance both. So I decided to quit university and focus full-time in writing. And here I am, like 10 years later, in Washington.
10 years and 3 books later.
And 4 books later.
4 books.
Three books, that's right. The first one was already out.
And a couple of audio-visual adaptations.
And a couple of adaptations. We have the El tiempo entre costuras that was adapted by Antena 3, but then we could see it in Netflix. And now they are working on the Vineyard in La Templanza. They are filming it right now in Jerez, in southern Spain, and in the Canary Islands, pretending. They always lie in this business. So they pretend that it's Cuba and Mexico, but actually they are in the Canary Islands, in Tenerife, and in Madrid. So I think they are going to do something beautiful too.
Great. So for those who aren't familiar with The Vineyard, it is a historical fiction, like all of your books. And it takes us across many places. It takes us to many places. So the main character comes from Spain and makes a life for himself in the mines in Mexico. and experiences a very sudden loss of money, which leads him to come up with a couple of solutions. And a major part of those solutions is to announce a move to Cuba. And he also gains a little bit of a boost from historical situation and from people's perceptions of those historical situations. And several people in Mexico decide they're going to help him. They want him to invest for them in Cuba. So he goes to Cuba, and there he meets with a system that is very different from the system in Mexico. And he meets a husband and a wife and gets embroiled between them in different ways. And the story goes on. Some bad luck, some good luck. And ultimately, he finds himself back in Spain, not home exactly, but back in Jerez, and living in a farmhouse that belongs to someone else. And there we go. So that's the quick synopsis, and those of you who have read it already know it. Those of you who haven't should read it. That's why we're here, to celebrate that. But one of the things that really strikes me about this book and about the other books is just what it takes as a researcher and a writer and human to go back in time and to recreate actual events through characters that are very personalized and then represent those. So in this book, we are literally going to 3 different places. We're experiencing 3 different economic systems. We're experiencing the social interactions with those 3 different economic systems, 3 different social systems, and so forth through these characters. So I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about your process. How do you research any novel where you're moving back in time and you're developing characters and sort of touching back on history through those characters' lives?
Yeah, well, I usually follow a very similar pattern for creating each one of my novels, because sometimes I prefer to talk about creating novels rather than writing novels, because writing is sometimes we think is the actual fact of typing the words, but creating a novel is a larger process, which takes around 2 years, more or less. For me, I always start with research period of time, which takes 3-4 months initially. I will go on researching later, but during this period of time, I don't write a word. I mean, I don't write a word of the actual story. I take notes and I make my lists and I write down some ideas. But basically, I read and I think and I travel and I talk to people, and I'm somehow constructing, building the idea in my mind and in my papers, just in handwriting, in a notebook or on some cards. And what type of sources I use? Everything. From, let's say, more orthodox, like academic texts or books, articles, and I mean, history with capital H, the important things, the facts and the figures and the times and the dates, everything. But I also read a lot of literature about the time or the place I'm going to write about. Sometimes I go back to literature from the period I'm going to write about, and sometimes I use contemporary literature that somehow reflects that moment. I use all kind of books of correspondence, letters and everything, biographies, travel books, all type of information that can provide me with little pieces and details that I may use them just for tiny aspects of the novel. I don't want to write a volume of history. I want to write fiction, but I need these details, and that's why I'm researching. I use as much visual information as I can gather. Like for some books, it's possible, the ones that are more contemporary, like Las Hijas del Capitán, for example, the last one, which is in the 1930s. I can use a lot of photographs, family albums, postcards, all kinds of photographs from magazines. If we go to La Templanza, to the Vineyard, that's much more difficult because we are in the mid-19th century, so I use old paintings, maps, and completely different material, graphical material. And another thing that I do very often is I talk to people. That's wonderful. When I have the chance to talk to people, sometimes, for example, for Las Hijas del Capitán, for the last book, I've been able, I had the privilege to talk to people who were either kids at the time in the 30s, or maybe they were born later, but they still grew up in the families of immigrants. So they heard all those stories, and they grew up feeling that they belonged to a different country, and feeling this idea of having that double identity. And sometimes when these people are not alive, like in the case of the Vineyard, I talk to people related to the business or the things I'm dealing with. In the fiction, for example, I went to for the Vineyard, like let's say half of the book was settled in Jerez, in the sherry wine trade and production. So I went to Jerez on several occasions, and I talked to the bodegueros family, to these people linked to the business of wine, of sherry. And then they talked to me about the grandparents, or the family ancestors, and how they started their business, and how things were different in the past from now. So I use all kinds of information. I must say that that's the best part of writing a book. When there comes this day in which you open a document, and you have to write capítulo 1. I say, oh my God, here comes the worst part. Because when you are researching, you are having so much fun. You learn a lot. You talk to people, you travel, you discover new things that you didn't know anything about. Sometimes I have to force myself to stop. You are not going to write a doctoral dissertation about this. You just need a couple of ideas. But it's fun because you don't have any limits. You use research, and you find fascinating stories, and suddenly you think, no, I shouldn't write about this. I should write about this, something completely different, because so many wonderful things come out suddenly. But then you have to be strict and force yourself to keep the track that you have started. And as I said, that wonderful period takes like 3, 4, maybe 5, maybe 2.5 months, and then comes real life. We have to work. And then I start writing, and at the same time, I keep researching a little bit, but just for the details, whatever I need. We are in Mexico, and I'm designing a dinner, for example. No? What would they have for dinner in Mexico in 1861 or 65? So I try to find the little piece of information that I need to fill that blank. But let's say like the main mass of information that I need is produced in the first months. And it's wonderful. And then I have to write, and that's not wonderful at all. No, it is, but a bit less. And then I keep writing for let's say, like a year more or less, might be 14 months, maybe 11 and a half. And then comes the worst part, which is to start from the beginning again, reading and saying, is this correct, this is not, should I change or should I keep it the way it is? That's the third and worst part of it. And that's it. And then I send it to my publishers, and there is a new, like, fourth part of section in which some other people start, they check the text, and they start thinking about which type of cover we're going to have, which kind of marketing campaign, and these things that are beyond my control sometimes. I'm sort of involved in that last section, but not that much.
All right.
And that's a process, that's it.
Okay.
And then books are here.
Thank you for sharing that process. I think it's important for people to hear about process, because oftentimes we read the book that is finished and we don't think about everything that goes into that. So I appreciate that. I wonder, for instance, in this particular case, while you're talking to those in the sherry industry in Jerez, do their voices come up in this book? Do any of the characters start to sound like some of the individuals that you have the opportunity to talk to? Or do you find yourself sort of recreating characters from some of their discussions of their family members?
I try to create characters that are 100% fictional. I usually don't take aspects from real people and transfer them to my fiction characters. But sometimes I take, like, very little details, like a name or a sentence that I hear from someone, or things like that. But basically, I don't transfer the characters themselves. And sometimes I find very attractive people and say, oh, you could be a perfect character. But I feel that I'm a fiction writer, basically. So I try to create my own characters from scratch without taking real people to my pages.
Great, great. And how do you feel about in the case of the Seamstress, how do you feel about the way that came out on the screen?
I think they did a great job with the adaptation of the book. Although at the beginning I was like, oh my God, what are they going to do with this little girl? I felt like a mother who had to protect the character and the novel. But my main concern was that readers could not be betrayed. Do you say like this? Que no se sintieran traicionados. When they started with the production of the television series of the time in between, we already had, like, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of readers, so quite a lot. And I knew, and because they told me, great that you're going to do this series, but please be careful that they don't, que no se la carguen. You understand, most of you Spanish, que no se la carguen. And that was my main interest, that the soul, the nature of the book could not be destroyed in order to create something that could be very attractive in a visual way, but without keeping the soul of the book itself. So I think they managed to do it. The story is the same. Sometimes they add a little subplot here, or they create a new character there. But basically, the plot, it's the path, the main character Sida follows is the same in the book and in the series. But the book is there. I think that the main substance is there. And readers were happy with the result. That was my main concern. So the day after we saw it on a Monday night in television, the day after when readers told me, perfecto, ahí está el libro, no sufras más. I said, well, we got it. So I felt very, very happy. I think they did a great job. They were very respectful, and I'm sure they will do the same thing with La Templanza. We'll see.
Well, I know there are readers in the audience, and I'm sure that people would like to ask you questions. Can
Please.
we open it up for questions? We have 2 microphones here in the middle of the room. If people have questions for Maria, please head to the microphones. Please.
Hi.
Hi.
I had a question, please, about your writing process for the time between. A fabulous book. I just loved that book.
Thank you.
Do you, when you start your second part of the process, do you start writing in a sort of linear fashion with an outline, or do you write scenes and you put them together? What kind of a method do you use?
Thank you. Well, I usually have a very clear structure of what I want to write and the path the characters are going to follow, and I more or less know how they are going to finish. But I don't have the details in my mind. So I would say that I have like the skeleton. I'd say like 50–60% of the story is in my mind. But still, I need some subtramas, some subplots here, and new characters that show up, because suddenly I'm aware that I need someone else to do something that completed a scene. So more or less I have a very clear idea of the different steps and the different circumstances and the different main characters. But let's say that about 40% of details are not in my mind before I start writing, and then I use them or I create them as I need them, following the narration. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, we'll go over here and then come back this way.
Hola.
Hola.
Autumn.
Yes.
That's her name. I signed the book. Thank you.
Your wonderful books all take
Thank
place
you.
on different continents, different time periods, very different topics. And I was just wondering what your process was there in choosing such a broad difference in scenery and plot and everything, really.
Sorry, I think I missed.
How you make the choices.
My choices. Okay, that's I missed the word.
She has different scenes and plots.
Thank you for the question. Each book has a different origin. Usually, I start with the place, with the location. That's usually the first thing that comes to my mind. And usually, I look at the locations. I focus on locations that have something to do with me, or that are interested for a number of reasons. For example, in the time in between, my original idea was to look back to Tetuán, Tánger, Protectorado de España en Marruecos in the first decades of the 19th century, because I have a family connection. My mother was born there, my grandparents lived there for decades, and I grew up listening to references of this old world. And everything came later. Then I started researching, I found the historical characters, and I decided to create a fiction using those characters as if they were fictional characters too, although they were real, Coronel Begvedere and Rosalind Fox. So, but the origin was a geographical point. And for Misión Olvido, The Heart Has Its Reason, it was something similar. I wanted to use Californian missions, the old Californian missions, Spanish missions that were created by the padres, as they call them in California, Fray Junipero Serra and the Franciscan priests. So I wanted to write a novel with those Californian Californian missions inside, but I didn't want to write a purely historical novel because I would have to go back to the late 18th, early 19th century, and I didn't feel like writing such a historical novel. So I decided to write a more contemporary plot with some intrigues that connect present and past. But my idea started in my mind during a trip to California when I started visiting the different missions, and I said, well, this is so connected to our Spanish history, and in Spain we know so very little about this. And I can't understand, that was my thought at the time, I can't understand why we have so very few references in literature to this whole world of the missions, which is so beautiful. And I couldn't find out any books. El Zorro, that was it, basically. And I thought, well, if nobody has written about this, why don't I do it? So that was the origin. But then I created a more contemporary plot and then another subplot, and finally the missions. But the origin was California and the Camino Real missions. And then with La Templanza, with the Vineyard, it was basically the same thing. I wanted to focus on Jerez and the wine industry and the wine trade, the international wine trade that was so very important in the 19th century for the sherry wine. In the 19th century, more than 20% of all the Spanish exports were wine from Jerez delivered to all over the world and mainly to Great Britain. But even in America, you received some Jerez at the time. El Barril de Amontillado and some books. What was the name? The Barrel of Amontillado? You know the Edgar Allan Poe book, novel? Is that the name? No? Yeah, yes, I think so. Well, I mean, that even in literature, in American literature, there are references to sherry wine, as there was in British English, Chaucer, Shakespeare, the Dickens, they all make references to sherry wine because at the time in the past, it was one of the most well-known and popular and famous and how you say, more prestigious wines. So I wanted to write about that. Sherry and the connections between Jerez and the rest of the world. And from that idea, I started working and creating the story of a man who is what we call in Spain an Indiano. Those men who, basically men, there were not many women at that time, men who left Spain, went to America during colonial times mainly and a little bit later, and they worked hard and they were able to 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. And they were able to create to make a lot of money, and then went back to Spain. Well, to make a long story short, Jerez was the beginning, and then I created the story, and then introduced Mexico and Cuba, and back to Jerez. And so that's basically where the ideas come from, and how I make my choices, by choosing a location that has some sort of appeal, some sort of attractive to me, and then I start researching and thinking and building something bigger. Okay, thank you. 5 minutes, sorry.
We're good. We've got 2 more questions.
Hi, hello.
Thank you for coming and talking to us.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about research again with regard to spy methods and time in between, especially that fascinating idea of transmitting information through sewing.
Uh-huh.
So that's the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a double answer to your question, because initially I thought that was my invention. For those of you, for those of you who have already read the book, I will refresh your mind, and for those of you who haven't, I will let you know what happens. At a point, Sida, the main character, uses the, how do you say, the patrones, Carmelina, the patterns. The patterns of the dresses she's going to create, she's going to sew for the ladies, the German, maybe, mostly the German, the wives of the Nazis who were living in Madrid at the time. So she started using the Morse code in the patterns with lines and dots and you say that, lights and dots?
Yeah.
Yeah, like reflecting the stitches. And then she transfers messages using that. And I thought, what a brilliant idea I had. So I created that story and I introduced it in my book, and I thought, how smart you are. And that was it. So when I started presenting the book, and there was a television program in Andalusian television, El Público Lee, and they asked me this question: how did you manage it? I say, oh, it was my idea. I'm so smart. And then there was an English lady there. She told me, you're wrong, you're so wrong. During First and Second World War, they already used that in order to transfer messages, codified messages. So probably I read it somewhere, can't remember where exactly, and I forgot the origin of the idea, and I assumed it was mine, but it wasn't at all. But I still can't remember where I got the information from. Okay, thank you.
We have one more question.
Okay.
Hi again.
Hi.
I've read 3 of your 4 books, and the level of facts in them are fascinating. They are the type of book that I have to Google. Wow, I didn't know about this. And I was wondering, when you do that research of California and Las Hijas del Capitán, and of course the time in between, which one is for you one of those facts that has been fascinating, that you really, are like surprised to discover in your research that?
What?
And the second question, very
Okay.
quick, is if you can give us a hint of what would be the next book about.
Oh, wow. I can't say a word, not yet. No, it's still in mantillas. So it's like a tiny baby. And I can't say a word about this. But I will reply to your first question, which is, there are so many things that it's so difficult for me to mention one or two, because you start reading and you find so many fascinating lives of people or periods of time or circumstances that happened. I don't know, for example, for Las Hijas del Capitán, my last novel, it's about Spanish immigration in the United States in the first decades of the 20th century. I couldn't imagine that there was such a consistent colony. There were, in the 30s, there were like 30,000, more than 30, between 30 and 40,000 people, Spaniards, living in the US, registered, officially living there. There were many more who didn't register in the Spanish consulate or anywhere. And they had such a strong community. They had all kinds of institutions, lots of stores, shops, bodegas where they could buy wine from Spain, salchichón, chorizo, lentejas, aceite de oliva, wherever you needed. You could find panderetas en Navidad, discos, everything. They had institutions like la Casa de Galicia, Círculo Valenciano, el Centro Andaluz, el Centro Vasco Americano, all type of institutions belonging to different communities of Spain, plus some supranational like La Nacional, Centro Benéfico Español, different ones. So they had newspapers, a newspaper, but with daily information about what was happening in the world, what was happening in Spain, what was happening in Latin America, the boats that were coming back and forth, the different activities of the colony, everything. So things like that surprised me a lot. I thought I was going to I was going to have to create all the environment around my fictional characters, but I did it because it was there. So every time that I found something new, I said, wow, I couldn't believe this was here and so hidden. The people who belonged to the colony knew about that, but those who didn't have an idea. So these little things here and there, they always open doors to new surprises. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to go. Actually, I'm being told maybe after we close it down.
We have a sign here. This lady showing us 3 minutes.
I'd just like to echo something that the ambassador said at the end. It is such a privilege to be here and to learn about Spanish culture. Thank you to the embassy for supporting that. And thank you, Maria, for really sort of working on that history through fiction that is accessible, as we can see, because you have so many wonderful questions. And I'd like to thank the audience for participating, for asking their questions, and for being here to close down the festival.
Muchas gracias,
so much,
Susan.
Maria.
Thank you so much. Gracias a todos. Thank you.